Before you could swipe right or react with a fire emoji, there was just a hallway. A hallway that smelled like pencil shavings and cafeteria fries. And down that hallway, standing next to her locker, flipping through her notes like she wasn't waiting for anything, was Jessica. You didn't know her that well. Maybe you sat 2 rows behind her in history class. Maybe you passed her once on the way to the library. Maybe you saw her laugh at something a friend said and it knocked the air out of your lungs. You didn't have her number. You didn't follow her on anything. You didn't even know if she knew your name. But still, your stomach twisted when she looked up and saw you standing there. Back then, flirting didn't come with a buffer. It came with heartbeat noise in your ears and damp palms on your jeans. It came with actual risk, not the digital kind where you're embarrassed for a second before closing the app. The kind that made you sweat through your shirt. You didn't start with a text. You started with a look, a real, live, unfiltered look, too long to be an accident, too short to be confident. It lingered, then snapped away, then came back. Sometimes that was enough. A glance, a smile, the tiniest smirk from the corner of her mouth. Your whole day was made. But if you were brave, if you were bold, you said something. Hey, that was it. One syllable, a breath, a universe of effort behind a single sound. If she said hey back, your knees weakened. If she didn't, you pretended you were talking to someone else and walked away, dying inside. There were no likes to send, no streaks to maintain, no typing indicators to study obsessively. Just you and her and a tiny moment you tried to stretch as far as it would go. You didn't have the luxury of curating your words behind a screen. Everything you said with a cracking voice and a dry throat. Every word could land or fall flat. There was no delete, no edit, no unsend. Only the truth of what came out and the hope that it didn't sound as stupid as it felt. Sometimes, flirting looked like walking a different route to class, or standing in the lunch line a little too long just to bump into her, or asking her opinion on a homework assignment you already finished. You'd hang around the places you thought she might be. The vending machine, the benches out front, the last aisle of the school library, hoping not in a creepy way, just a desperate, innocent way that she might see you. When she did, you played it cool. As cool as anyone in a hoodie the sizes too big and shoes that squeaked could be dot. And if she smiled, if she laughed at your joke, if she didn't walk away immediately, well, that meant something. Even if it was small, even if it was only for a second. There were no dating apps. There were notes folded into triangles, passed quietly, slipped into a binder, left inside a locker. Do you like me? Yes, no. Maybe you would agonize over every word, rewrite it 5 times, wonder if you should sign your name or just leave a hint. If she wrote back, your world exploded. And if she didn't, you stared at her from a distance, trying to figure out if it meant no or if she just hadn't seen it. You spent entire evenings lying on your bed, thinking about a 5-second conversation, replaying it, rehearsing the next one. Flirting didn't happen in bulk. It happened in fragments, a look across the classroom, a hand brushing another during a group activity, a shared laugh over something no one else noticed. And if you finally found the courage, if the stars aligned, you asked for her number, her real number, to her house phone. She'd scribble it on a torn piece of paper. You carry it like treasure, guard it from sweat, from rain, from your mom's cleaning sprees. You'd stare at it, memorize it, dial it and hang up, dial it again and hang up again, until finally, you did in single quotes t. The phone rang, and someone picked up. Hello? And your soul left your body. It wasn't her. It was a dad. It was a mom. Sometimes, it was a little brother who yelled into the receiver and didn't tell her you called at all. You held the receiver with 2 hands, the cord coiled around your wrist like a lifeline. You swallowed hard. Hi, is Jessica there? And then you waited through the silence, waited through the footsteps, waited through the sound of her name being called from across the house. And then, like a miracle, hey, her voice, softer than you imagined, realer than you were ready for. You said hi back. You asked how her day was. You told a joke. She laughed. You laughed. You both tripped over your words and filled the silences with yeah and cool. You talked about nothing, and somehow, it was everything. Every minute of that call felt like you were hanging on the edge of a cliff. One wrong move in it could all fall apart, but it didn't. At least, not yet. And when it ended, when you both mumbled some awkward goodbye, you stayed there, holding the phone long after she hung up, listening to the quiet hum of the line. You stared at the ceiling, replay after replay, line by line. How you said her name, how she said yours. You wanted to call again, but not too soon. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week. You didn't text her afterward. You didn't check if she posted anything. You just waited. In real life, for the next time your paths would cross. And when they did, if they did, you started over. A glance, a smile, a maybe. Because flirting back then wasn't about efficiency. It wasn't about strategy. It wasn't about winning. It was about hoping and showing up anyway. Flirting didn't always look like talking. Sometimes it looked like scribbles. Messy handwriting on the corner of notebook paper, folded into tiny squares, triangles, or strange origami shapes. You learned in 5th grade and never forgot. It was the secret language of the hallway. You passed it without a word, slipped it across desks, through friends, under the cafeteria table. You didn't double text. You double folded. You didn't hit send. You trusted that someone wouldn't read it out loud. And inside, your heart, in ink, misspelled and smudged. Hey, I think you're cool. Do you want to hang out after school? Or the infamous classic, do you like me? Yes, no, maybe you stared at that box for 30 minutes before handing it over. And after you did, you didn't breathe until it came back. Notes were sacred. Some people kept them in shoeboxes under the bed. Others folded them into bookmarks hidden in diaries. They weren't disposable. They were artifacts. You read them over and over. Analyzed every sentence, every doodle. Was that a heart or just an accidental swirl? And if they added APS, forget it. That was basically a proposal. But notes weren't the only way people spoke love. There were mixtapes, a blank cassette, carefully labeled, your handwriting on the spine. Every song chosen for a reason. Not just what was popular, what meant something. Track 1, a song that says I noticed you. Track 2, a song that says I think about you. Track 3, a song that says I'd never admit this out loud. But you couldn't just drag and drop a playlist. You had to sit by the stereo, wait for the song on the radio, hit record at the perfect moment. Try not to get the DJ's voice at the end. Mess it up. Start over. It could take hours. But when you gave it to her, when she slid it into her Walkman and pressed play, you felt like you were speaking a language only the two of you knew. And then there were phone calls. Not the kind where you multitask. Not the kind where you text while on the line. This was focus, commitment. The house phone didn't forgive. No headphones. No privacy. Just the long, curly cord stretching down the hallway while your mom mouthed, "Get off in 10. You'd pace, stare at the ceiling, lie on the carpet and twirl the phone cord like it was a lifeline. Sometimes the calls were short. Sometimes they lasted all night. Sometimes no one answered and you listened to 6 rings in silence before hanging up and swearing you'd never try again. But you always did, because back then, flirting was full of silence. Not awkward silence, tense silence, meaningful silence, the kind where no one speaks, but everything is said. You waited days to bump into each other. You walked the long way between classes just to catch her on the stairs. You pretended to forget your lunch so you could ask if she had a snack. And sometimes, you just watched. Not in a weird way, just in awe. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she laughed with her whole face, the way she sang under her breath when she thought no one was listening. You memorized her without even trying. Asking someone out wasn't a swipe. It was a coin toss. It was standing by her locker, heart in your throat, rehearsing lines like you were going on stage. Hey, do you want to go to the movies? Your voice cracked, your throat closed. You were convinced your body was going to explode. Sometimes she said yes, sometimes she said no, and sometimes she said, "I'll let you know." You spent the whole weekend in emotional limbo. But at least you tried. Back then, rejection wasn't digital. It didn't disappear. It walked past you in the hallway. It sat 3 seats away in class. It lived on your bus route. You had to carry it, own it, live through it. And somehow, that made the victories even sweeter. Because when she said yes, when she showed up to the movie, or the fair, or the diner with the red booths and milkshakes, big enough for 2, it felt like magic. You didn't check your phone every 5 seconds. You didn't post about it. You didn't even tell anyone, at least. Not right away. It was yours. A quiet victory, something too delicate to say out loud. You sat next to her and tried to think of something to say, and when she looked at you and smiled, you forgot every sentence you'd rehearsed. But it didn't matter, because back then, Flirting wasn't a performance. It was just the nervous kids in the same place at the same time, trying not to mess it up. The movie date was the final frontier, the moment where everything you've been building, the glances, the phone calls, the folded notes was suddenly real. There she was, Jessica, wearing something slightly different than school clothes. A little effort in her hair, maybe some lip gloss, maybe not. You showed up 15 minutes early, not to impress her, but because you were afraid of being late. You paced outside the theater, pretending to check your pockets for something important. Tickets, money, dignity, and then you saw her. She walked toward you like a scene from a music video playing only in your mind. Every step made your chest tighter. You forgot what you planned to say. You blurted high to fast. Too loud. She said, "Hey," soft and kind, and that was the start. Buying the tickets was a mission in itself. You didn't book online. You stood in line and hoped the movie wasn't sold out. You chose something safe, not too scary, not too romantic unless you were bold. Usually something with enough background noise so you didn't have to talk too much. She stood beside you, arms crossed. You could feel the heat from her shoulder just inches away. You paid. You tried not to fumble the change. You handed her the ticket like it was a love letter. Inside, the theater was cold. You panicked over seating middle row or back row, side, aisle or center. You chose middle, not to forward, not to obvious. You both sat down. Too much space between you. Then to little. You adjusted, coughed, crossed your arms, uncrossed them, wiped your palms on your jeans, and the movie hadn't even started yet. Once the lights dimmed, you forgot the plot instantly. Your brain focused entirely on one question. Should I hold her hand? You waited. You watched her out of the corner of your eye, her fingers tapping against her thigh, your fingers gripping the armrest like a lifeline dot. It was a strategy game. First, rest your hand near hers, close enough to suggest, far enough to retreat, then maybe stretch, casual, a yawn, an elbow shift, a small, slow migration. And if your pinky brushed hers and she didn't flinch, that was it. That was your green light. If she moved closer, jackpot. If she didn't, you died inside and didn't move for the rest of the film. Sometimes you did hold hands. Sometimes you didn't. Sometimes your hands just sat there awkwardly, sweating beside each other in silence. But you remembered every second of it. After the movie, there was always food, a diner, a pizza place, anywhere with booths, sticky menus, and songs playing low to sing along to. You sat across from each other, knees occasionally bumping. You shared fries. You each ordered a milkshake and tried not to slurp too loud. You asked her what she thought of the movie. She shrugged, said it was fine. You both laughed at something stupid. You asked what kind of music she liked. She said everything, and you nodded like that meant something. And maybe you talked about your families, about how math class sucked, about your dog, or her favorite band, or how the girl in the row behind you wouldn't stop talking during the film. It didn't matter what was said. It mattered that you were saying it to her, and she was listening to you. Eventually, you walked her home, or her dad came to pick her up, or you both sat awkwardly outside, waiting for one of your moms. And in that final moment, you thought, should I hug her? Should I say something meaningful? Should I try to hold her hand again? Everything about you screamed, do not mess this up. But sometimes you didn't do anything. You just looked at her and said, see you Monday. And she said, yeah. And that was enough, because back then, a single moment could stretch for miles, and the memory of it, her laugh, her eyes, the clink of ice in her glass could carry you for a week. Back then, the whole school knew even if you hadn't said a word. Flirting didn't happen in isolation. It lived in glances, but also in whispers. Your friends noticed before you even admitted it to yourself. You like her, don't you? Nah, dude, you just walked by her class again. You denied it, of course. To fast, to obvious. And that's how they knew it was true. Word traveled fast. Faster than you. Before you knew it, your best friend told her best friend that maybe you had a thing for her. But only if she had a thing for you too, which she might. But also maybe not. It was complicated. So began the oldest game on earth. Trying to act normal, while being the worst liar on the planet. The next time you crossed paths, it was different. Not because anything had happened, but because now it might. You felt the weight of possibility on your shoulders, and so did she. She looked at you a little longer than usual, smiled a little later, tilted her head when you talked like she was actually listening now. You tried to be cool, tried to say something funny, tried not to look at your shoes every 5 seconds. Inside, your brain was a war zone. Did she know? Did she feel the same? Was she smiling at you or just being polite? Was this real or just what you wanted it to be? You didn't ask. You didn't dare. You just lived in the maybe. At lunch, someone teased you about her. You laughed it off, pretended it was no big deal. But when they mentioned her name, your ears burned. And when she walked by, your eyes found her like they always did. Sometimes, your hands brushed in the hallway. Sometimes, she sat next to you without saying much. Sometimes, you said her name just to hear it out loud. And still, you said nothing. You kept it all bottled up in your chest like a secret you were scared to ruin. Back then, flirting wasn't a sprint. It was a slow burn. A buildup of small moments that never quite tipped into confession. It was leaving the classroom. Just a bit slower than the others, hoping she'd walk out with you. It was asking to borrow a pen, even when you had 3 in your pocket. It was laughing aloud at her joke, then pretending you weren't listening at all. Sometimes, she wrote her name on your notebook when you weren't looking. Sometimes, she doodled something next to it, a heart, maybe just a flower. You stared at it for hours. You wondered what it meant. You told no one. The thing about flirting back then was that so much happened without being said. And sometimes, that was enough, because there was power in the tension, in the almost, in the what if. You weren't trying to get her number just to show your friends. You weren't rushing to post a picture together. You just wanted to know if what you were feeling was real. But you couldn't ask directly. You couldn't DM. You couldn't send a meme with hidden meaning. You had to rely on signs. How she looked at you in math class, whether she waited for you after the bell, whether she laughed at your dumbest jokes or ignored them completely. And then, sometimes, nothing happened. Not because she didn't like you, not because you didn't like her, but because you were both too scared to speak out. The moment passed. The semester ended. Schedules changed. She moved lockers. You sat further apart, and the possibility faded, but it stayed in your mind. Years later, you'd still wonder, still think about how close it came. The beauty of flirting back then was that even silence had weight. Even the things you never said were full of meaning. And sometimes, the almost love you never confessed felt bigger than the ones you did. Back then, you didn't buy love. You made it, with construction paper, dried out glitter glue, and zero artistic skill. You wrote her name in bubble letters on a birthday card you folded yourself. You cut out stars, drew hearts. You added inside jokes no one else would understand. You sprayed your cologne on it like it was a potion. You didn't spend $20 on flowers. You picked one dandelion from the schoolyard and handed it to her like it was a rose. She laughed, said it was cute. You died inside, but in a good way. Sometimes you gave her gum, the kind she liked, not because it was romantic, but because you noticed. And noticing was the whole point. You burned her ACD. You put her name on the label. You wrote the track list by hand in tiny letters. You added a song you weren't sure she liked, but it reminded you of her. You wrapped it in notebook paper. You handed it to her without making eye contact. She smiled. She said, "Thanks." And that was enough to replay in your head for weeks. Back then, flirting wasn't a grand gesture. It was a tiny rebellion against being ignored. You didn't have money. You had time. You had effort. You had the courage to show you cared, even if you couldn't say it. Sometimes you gave her your bracelet. Sometimes you made her a cake cane out of string. Sometimes you gave her your hoodie, pretending it wasn't a big deal, even though it smelled like your whole house. And sometimes she gave something back, a folded piece of paper with a joke on it, a sticker on your binder when you weren't looking. A doodle she left on your desk, a candy from her bag, just because you treasured it. You didn't eat the candy. You saved it in a drawer. You stared at the doodle and wondered if she drew it just for you. The whole thing felt like a secret code, a series of messages written in gestures. And every time someone else got her attention, you panicked. You wondered if he liked her too, if she liked him more, if everything you'd done was just a one-player game. But you didn't say anything. You just waited, watched, hoped. Love wasn't declared. It was hinted at. Your drawing was cool. That song you mentioned, I listened to it. I saved you a seat. Those were love letters. Back then, you never said I love you. Not really. You said, be careful on the field trip. You look nice today. Here, take my jacket. I'm not cold. You said everything except what you meant, And somehow, it still got across. One day, maybe, you wrote it on a folded note, at the end of a call, on the last page of a school book you gave back late on purpose. I think I like you, or, more dangerously, I like you. No hearts, no smiley face, just those 3 words, sitting on the page like a ticking bomb. You gave it to her, then walked away, because you couldn't stand to see her face when she read it. And if she said something later, anything, you clung to it like gospel. If she didn't, you pretended it didn't matter, even if it cracked you open, because back then, saying it out loud felt impossible, but giving it away in pieces, that you could do. Sometimes you didn't stay in the maybe. Sometimes the story actually began. Quietly, softly, almost accidentally. One day, she just didn't sit across the room anymore. She sat next to you. Every day after that, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You didn't make a move. You made space, and she filled it. You didn't ask, "Want to be my girlfriend?" You started carrying her books. She started finishing your sentences. And somehow, that was the answer. You started walking her to class. Not all of them, just the ones that mattered. The ones at the far end of the hallway. The ones with time in between. And she never asked why you waited. She just smiled when you showed up. You got used to seeing her in your day, the same way you got used to the smell of your locker or the sound of the third period bell. It wasn't fireworks, it was familiarity, and that felt even better. You knew it was something real when you stopped trying to impress her. You told her the truth, that you cried during The Lion King, that you hated the way your hair curled at the back, that sometimes you felt invisible. She didn't flinch. She just listened. When she talked, you listened to every detail, every rant about teachers and parents and siblings who wouldn't leave her alone. You didn't offer solutions. You offered presence. You became each other's silence, the kind that didn't feel empty, the kind that felt like home. You didn't plan dates. You planned excuses to be in the same place. Group movie night, sure, but only if she was going. Study session in the library, you didn't need help, but you showed up anyway. That awkward school dance, you hated it, but you stood in the corner just in case she came to. Sometimes, you sat on the bleachers long after practice ended, talking, not even about anything deep. Sometimes it was just, what would you do if you won $1 million? What's your favorite cereal? Would you rather fight 1 horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? It wasn't what you said. It was how you said it. Like every word meant more just because she was the one hearing it. You started sharing food. 1 bag of chips, 2 straws in the same soda. You split the crust of your sandwich because she always said she liked just a bite. You started finishing each other's sentences, not because you rehearsed them, but because you were finally tuned to the same rhythm. You knew her routines. The way she twirled her hair when she was bored. The exact moment in class she always looked out the window. The sound of her footsteps when she ran to catch up with you. You memorized her in fragments, and together, they built something solid. Something that made you check your outfit twice in the mirror. Something that made your day better just by knowing she was in it. She started teasing you, lightly, often, about the way you always wore the same hoodie, about how you never brought a pen, about how you always said literally when you meant actually. You teased her back, about her messy locker, her obsession with sour candy, the way she refused to carry an umbrella even when it rained. That was the love language. Tease, smile, repeat. At some point, it became a routine. Not in a boring way, in a comforting way. She waited for you after class. You saved her a seat at lunch. You texted good night without fail. Even if it was just 1 emoji and 2 yawns. You didn't need to perform anymore. You could show up tired, moody, off. And she'd still smile at you like you were the best part of her day. You called each other by nicknames no one else used. Inside jokes grew like vines across your conversations. Everything had a meaning. Everything felt private even when the whole school saw you walking together. You met each other's families, maybe just once. A quick hello in the driveway. A shy smile at the kitchen table. You helped her with homework. She helped you with your nerves. You walked her home in the rain and didn't care that your socks got soaked. She wore your jacket, not for fashion, because it smelled like you, and that made her feel safe. You didn't say I love you. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was there. In the way she held your gaze when everyone else looked away. In the way she remembered that you hated strawberry milk. In the way she laughed before your joke was even over. Because she already knew the punchline. Sometimes people asked, If you were together, you never really knew what to say. Were you? You weren't dating. But you were not dating. You didn't have a label. You had moments, and they added up to something more than friendship. Even if you never called it anything, even if it ended, even if she moved away, even if high school swallowed you both in different directions, even if time turned her face into a blur in your mind, you still remembered the way it felt. To be seen, to be wanted, to be chosen not for a night, not for show, but for all the boring, ordinary, quietly beautiful minutes of a day. That was love, too, the kind that didn't need a big ending, because the middle was enough, and the memory, it stuck, not because it was perfect, but because, for a little while, it was real. You didn't flirt because you were ready. You flirted because you wanted to feel something, anything. You weren't looking for your soulmate. You were looking for a moment, a heartbeat outside your chest, a glance that made the hallway feel different, a laugh that broke through the fog of routine. Back then, life didn't feel romantic. It felt mechanical. Wake up, school, bell, hallway, homework, everything on repeat. But when you flirted, even a little something changed. A note, passed, a shoe tap, a hey that lingered longer than usual dot, and suddenly, the world wasn't just noise. It had a rhythm, a pulse, a secret you shared with one other person, even if only for a day. Flirting wasn't always about love. Sometimes it was about recognition. The smallest way of saying, I see you, I hear you, you exist. Because, most of the time, you didn't feel that way. You felt like a background character in everyone else's movie. Until someone asked for your help in math. Until someone touched your arm and said your name like it mattered. Until someone remembered that you hate raisins and brought you a different granola bar from the vending machine. That's what flirting was. Not always a door. Sometimes just a window. Brief, fleeting, and enough. You didn't talk about boundaries, or emotional labor, or being on the same page. You didn't have the language. You had looks. You had vibes. You had the ache of wanting to say something and the fear that saying it would ruin everything. So you said things like, your handwriting's cool. Is that a new hoodie? I like your laugh. And you meant, you matter to me. I want to be close to you. Don't disappear. You didn't always hope for a future. Sometimes you just hoped they'd turn around and smile when you passed them in the hallway. That was enough to carry you. Back then, you didn't need closure. You just needed confirmation that someone had noticed, that the energy you sent out had landed somewhere, that for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, one class period, you weren't just a face in the crowd. You were the face they saw, and maybe it never went further. Maybe they moved on. Maybe you never talked again. But you remembered, not the outcome, the feeling, the anticipation of walking into a room because they might be there, the spark when you both reached for the same pen, the moment when they caught your eye during a group project and smiled like you were in on the same joke. Flirting was how we made sense of the noise. It was how we rewrote boring days with invisible ink. How we made eye contact feel like music. How we learned to hope without asking for anything in return. We didn't have phones full of messages. We had moments, stolen glances, shared candy, notes that said nothing but meant everything. And for every time we got ignored, ghosted, or gently let down, we kept going. We kept hoping. Not because we were foolish, but because we were young, and it was all we knew. And years later, after you've forgotten their locker number, their birthday, their favorite song, you still remember what it felt like. The dizziness of a hallway crush, the burn of waiting for a phone call that never came, the courage it took to say hi when everything in you said to keep walking. That's the magic of flirting back then. It didn't promise anything. It didn't guarantee happy endings, but it let you feel alive for a minute, an afternoon, a semester. It made the world pause. It gave weight to your name on someone else's lips. It whispered, you're not invisible. You're not alone. You matter. Even if they forgot, even if it ended, even if nothing ever came of it, you remember. Because back then, flirting wasn't a skill. It wasn't a tactic. It was your way of reaching out to the world and asking, can you feel this too? And sometimes, just sometimes, someone did. We didn't know what we were doing, and honestly, that was the best part. We stammered. We overthought everything. We wrote drafts of messages in our heads before we even had anyone to send them to. We practiced conversations in front of mirrors. We said hi to loudly, to late, or not at all. We panicked and changed the subject just as the moment started feeling honest. We liked people who didn't like us back. We misread signals. We told our friends we were over it when we absolutely weren't. We lied and said we didn't care. We cried when they weren't looking. It was messy and awkward and unforgettable. There were no guides, no top 10 ways to flirt videos, no step-by-step tutorials. We were just kids with too many feelings and not enough language. We improvised. We mimicked movie scenes and hoped they applied to real life. We copied things older kids did without knowing why. We tried being cool, but ended up being honest instead, and it worked. Not always, but sometimes. Sometimes someone looked at us like we were enough, and we held onto that look like it was a life jacket. Sometimes we said something dumb and they laughed anyway. Sometimes they looked nervous too, and we realized, oh, I'm not alone in this. We didn't always confess. We hinted, we offered pieces, little breadcrumbs of affection, a safe seat, a shared joke, a sleeve tug, a smile that lingered half a second along. It wasn't bold. It was brave, because it meant risking the truth, risking rejection, risking silence. And sometimes that hurt. But we still came back the next day, still looked down the hallway hoping to see them, still wrote their name in the margins of our notebooks, because even the messiest attempts at connection felt better than staying quiet forever. Flirting back then wasn't polished. It was built from fragments, from nerves, from half sentences, and shaky hands. We tried to play it cool, but our eyes gave us away, our shaky laughs, our too quick no big deal. We wanted to touch, but we didn't know how. We wanted to speak, but we didn't know what. So we did the only thing we could. We showed up every day, to class, to lunch, to lockers, hoping that maybe today something would happen, something small, a hello, a shoulder bump, a note folded for times and slipped into a backpack. And when something did happen, when someone smiled and meant it, when someone reached back, it was electric. It didn't need to be serious. It didn't need to last. It just needed to be real. A shared walk home, a hand held under a cafeteria table, a 3-minute call before dinner where no one said anything important. We didn't need grand declarations. We just needed a moment, a single, imperfect, heart-thudding moment that made us feel alive. Years later, you don't remember what day it was. You don't remember what grade you were in. You barely remember the names, but you remember how it felt. To be noticed, to be chosen, to be awkward and adored all at once. You remember the way your chest filled up when they said your name, the way your hands felt too big for your pockets, the way you couldn't stop smiling after they looked at you like you meant something. You didn't know what you were doing, and that's exactly what made it beautiful, because love, real love, even the early kind, isn't built from perfection. It's built from the trying, the fumbling, the second-guessing, the shaky maybe. So no, you didn't always get it right, but you showed up anyway, with your badly folded notes, your too long stares, your awkward jokes, your silence that said more than words ever could, and in a world that never stopped moving. That was the most romantic thing you could do. You let yourself be seen. You let yourself hope. You let yourself care. It was clumsy. It was imperfect. It was human. And it was beautiful.